Hello, and once again, and welcome to the Ohio Christian Counseling Ministries Talk Show. I'm your host, Michael Pearson, and here we deal with God's kingdom, His people, and the state of mind which we are called to walk into that kingdom. Now, today's episode, I figured we go into something a little bit more relevant to everybody, something that we can all relate to. But at the same time, I think it is something that we often overlook and we don't necessarily catch or even realize it's there. What I'm referring to is the inner child. Now, whether you know this or not, there's an inner child that exists inside of all of us. There's an inner child inside of us that is wounded and hurting. Now, some of you may say, well, I've never been abused. I've never been molested. I've never experienced any real trauma associated with physical abuse, mental abuse, or sexual abuse, so I'm good. And the fact of the matter is, nothing could be further from the truth. If you had an upbringing, then you have some unhealed aspect of yourself that is very much in need today of healing. You cannot escape it. None of us can escape it. It is just a part of living in this sin-soaked world. Life pulls at us, even as children. It is unrelenting, and it pulls at us in ways that strip us of the goodness that God sent us here with. Now, when we talk about sexual molestation, child abuse, child neglect, when we talk about mental abuse, physical abuse, those are the biggies. Those are the biggies. Those are the ones where later in life they can show up in so many different toxic and dysfunctional ways and patterns. But we're not overlooking those. But I want to look at the small things, because the small things, I think, is where you'll find out that you relate. It puts you on an even playing field. That it's not a matter of big or small. Let me say that. It's not a matter of big or small. It is a matter of what this inner child needs. And what this inner child needs, every single child, is based on this. Every single child has a why. At some point in every child's life, they have questioned, they have wondered, they have wanted to know, they have had a why. Children, and when we were children, we were very inquisitive. You know, there were so many things that we wanted to know. We wanted the answers to all the questions. I have raised 4 children, and I have 4 grands. And my 2 oldest, the 2 oldest. They one has gone past, one is in. Just there's this stage of why. They ask why all the time. It is the number one most important question to a child. Why? Why is the sky blue? Why is it raining? Mama, why can't I do this? Daddy, why can't I? Why? So those are those are the easy whys. But see, there are some whys that children have, and search yourself and you'll see this. There are some whys that children have and that we had that we never got an answer to. There were some whys that existed. Why does my friend's father, show up at his practices and my daddy does not? Why does my mother not come to parent and teacher conferences and the other child's mothers do? Why did this child have a birthday with so many friends that showed up, and my birthday only had a couple of cousins? These are the whys that live inside the heads, hearts, and minds of us. And since they live there, and since they are never, hardly ever expressed, we go on living with these whys. But I want to tell you something that's very important about these whys. Even the whys that appear to be bigger in comparison to the whys that appear to be smaller. This is an important thing about those whys. If we never get the answer, if we never get a full understanding on or an answer to those whys, this is the conclusion that most children will draw. It must be me. Hands down. That is what children, the conclusion that children will come to if they do not get answers to their why. Now, every why that a child has won't get answered. And because every why that a child has does not get answered, that means that that child then grows up with a narrative in its head, right? There's a movie that plays, that starts to play. It's on a constant reel in our heads as we mature and as we go older, that unanswered why and the conclusion that without that why being answered, that it must be me, it rolls a narrative. There's a movie that plays in our head. And when we start to feel like it must be me, let me be very clear about what that means when I say it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. If my father doesn't show up to a football game, maybe he doesn't love me enough. If my mother doesn't do such and such a thing, then maybe it's me. Maybe she doesn't love me enough. Why doesn't she love me enough? So when those whys go unanswered, they formulate opinions within us about ourselves. And we grow with this narrative. We grow with this movie on a constant reel in our head that is rooted in the unanswered whys and the conclusion being drawn that it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. And when we mature, when we grow up with that, what happens? We start to develop with insecurities. And those insecurities, once we feel them, we start to want, and because they don't feel good, right? Insecurities don't feel good. Shortcomings don't feel good. Those unanswered whys, they do not feel good. So we start to build barriers around those whys, those unanswered whys, and the conclusion being drawn that it must be me. There must be some flaw in me. And once we build those barriers around that, and that movie starts to play in our head, then the conclusion is, there will be an answer to the question. And the answer to the question simply becomes this: if I'm not good enough, then I'm not good enough. That's the answer. I'm just not good enough. So we build up these defenses, and this inner child gets locked down. And with it being locked down, we start to go about life as adults through our adolescence, and it starts during your adolescence, middle teens, and into our adult life. And the whole time, this inner child that has been locked away, pushed to the back, it starts to act through impulses and compulsions. So even if we think we've gotten rid of it out of sight, out of mind, that's absolutely not the case. Because it will soon start to behave, react, and make itself known through impulses and compulsions. Those impulses and compulsions eventually become detrimental to us. But we've gotten so used to disregarding this inner child and not dealing with it. We've gotten so used to just going on about our lives that we never notice that the very impulses and compulsions that we are living by, that are making us attract into our experiences, dysfunction, chaos, hurt, pain, is the very compulsions and impulses being suggested by this child. Because this child is beating on your heart, your conscience, asking you to give it some attention, and we want to suppress it. Because oftentimes it's easier to suppress than to manage and deal with. That is 100% my experience at Ohio Christian Counseling Ministries. People often don't want to look back at that inner child because it brings to remembrance some of the things that even you may have forgotten. But we go deep. We go in therapy and counseling sessions, we go deep. And I make sure I find those areas. I make sure I read in between the lines of the things that's said by each client so that I can get them to see the need to delve a little bit deeper. So when we lock this child away and this child starts to push and act through us, we start to further invalidate ourselves by allowing these compulsions and these impulses to have free run. Let me give you an example. If, let's say, you had a small child, and this small child came to you and said, I need to have the keys to the car so that I can go and take care of something that is very, very important to me. Of course, you would tell this child no. One, it's illegal. You got to be at least 16 to drive, at least here in Ohio. Two, it's irrational. It is completely and totally irrational to give your keys to a child that is underage. Three, not only is it irrational, and even if the child could get to the destination where it's wanting to get to, it will have gotten there and your car would probably not be recognizable because of all the bumps and dings and crashes and accidents and damage done to your vehicle. So even if this child gets there, they don't get there in a healthy way. So I want you to follow me and I want you to stay with me on this, please. Now let's say this same inner child that we've been talking about so far. Let's say the same inner child comes to you and says, hypothetically speaking, and says, hey, let me have the keys to your emotional vehicle. I have some place that I'm trying to get to, and it's important to me. Give me the keys to your emotional vehicle. For the same reasons that you should not give the keys to your vehicle, you should also not give the keys to your emotional vehicle. But what do? We, against all rationale, we hand those keys over to this inner child and allow this inner child to drive us around emotionally. And what happens to our lives? What happens to our situation, our circumstances? What happens to us? We become a wreck. We think we arrive at the destination only to find out that that's not the destination. We run into so many different things, bad relationships. There's so much damage done. We are so hurt. Airbag been deployed 5-6 times. We are injured. Yet we continue to hand over the keys to this wounded, hurting inner child so that it can drive us around emotionally. And like I just mentioned earlier, it drives us around and its behavior shows up through impulses and compulsions. That's how it shows up. In our rational mind, we're not okay with that. In our rational mind, we're not okay with the condition that we may find ourselves in life. We're not okay with that. But that wall that has been built around that child, it's time to tear them down. We have to tear those walls down and go back and deal with some of the issues that or embedded and rooted in this child. Let me say this, because I know this becomes a big issue with a lot of people. Whenever we deal with the inner child, we think that sometimes that this is a reflection of parenting, right? Sometimes, even as parents, if we hear our children say something that they may not have, maybe they necessarily didn't agree with or didn't like about our parenting, we think that that is an attack on us, when really it's just a revelation of theirs. So when we don't want to talk about sometimes this inner child and his issues, because sometimes we think in some way that we are in a bad mouthing or coming down on or speaking ill of maybe our parents, or something that they missed, or something that they were short on. But that's not the case. See, here's a message I'd like for everybody to get. Just because I notice what I needed from my mother or my father or my sisters or my brothers, just because I noticed what I needed from them, and I'm at a point where I can say, you know what, after dealing with this inner child and understanding the root of this issue, I need to express myself in this way. That does not mean that I do not love those people. That is not what it means. And a lot of times that inner child never gets healing because we think if we express the fact that we didn't receive certain things that we needed in the manner in which we needed it, that it is also an expression of not loving them. And that is just absolutely not the case. It is a loving thing to find that area in that inner child and express it to the one who has the answer to that why. Not because we want the answer, not because we need the answer, but because we want to say, you know what, now I understand where the issue lays. I'm not asking you to now try to make right what I missed so many years back, but what I am letting you know is that I recognize and understand why I stand where I stand today. And that's a loving and caring thing. And oftentimes it brings two people together in a much, much more intimate and closer way. So if we take that time to deal with that inner child and stop allowing that inner child and its compulsions and impulses to drive us around emotionally, if we take the time to manage that child and deal with it, we set ourselves free, because we give that child what it needs. And what that child needs is to know that it can trust us. My inner child needs to know that I'm trustworthy. My inner child needs to know that whereas no one else could give him an answer to his why, I take full responsibility in dealing with my inner child today. I'll answer those questions today. I'll manage whatever issues, emotions, emotional concerns this inner child has. I'll manage those today, because that is ultimately what is going to set this inner child free. The inner child needs to know that when it is making these compulsions and impulses, we need to know that is when the inner child is being the most expressive. See, one of the biggest issues that I notice, and this is sort of gender-based, a lot of issues that come up from a damaged inner child is when we feel like, because of its expressions and compulsions, and because of the situations it gets us in, instead of dealing with those impulses and compulsions, we instead make an adjustment to the dysfunction. Not to heal it. We make an adjustment to the dysfunction to harden ourselves against it, further putting a bigger barrier around that inner child. And the way that this shows up is in people becoming so independent that that they are actually no good for anybody else but themselves. That is a trap. So when this inner child is unhealed, it shows up through us in being people pleasers, an inability to be a source to self, driven by emotion, seeking external validation. These are all pinpoint indicators that there's something broken on the inside, because we have to learn to become a source to self. When the inner child doesn't get the answer to its why, it draws the conclusion that it must be me. There's something wrong with me. I know. There's something wrong with me. When the inner child accepts that and it plays that narrative, that movie in your head, then you are no longer a source to self. And if you are no longer a source to self, then you love people with the idea of getting instead of loving people with the idea to give. I hope that resonates, because if we are loving simply to get something, then we are loving in a dysfunctional way. I believe we love from the overflow. I love from the overflow. If I love someone, I'm not loving them because I need them to love me back. I'm loving them from my overflow. I'm loving them because I love myself. And because I love myself, that leaves me with more than enough to pour into other people. But when you have an issue and you have a narrative that's playing in your head, and that narrative that's playing in your head is like a big neon sign that is suggesting to you that you're not enough. You're not good enough. The answer to your why isn't important because it's you. When that is the movie and the narrative that plays in your head, then you become a people pleaser. Because you want people to accept you. You need people to accept you. You need external validation. You need for people to make you feel better by accepting you. That is because you're not a source to self. And if you're not a source to self, you have no overflow. And if you have no overflow, there is no means by which you can effectively and in a healthy way love other people. So what happens? You attract predator types, people who know and are masters at finding those who are willing to spill themselves for the need of being sopped up. And that is all a part of the inner child being unhealed and that dysfunction. If we become a source to self, then external validation goes away. If we become a source to self, then people pleasing go away. If we become a source to self, then we love from the overflow. We love with the understanding that I am loving you because I love you. I am not loving you because I need you to love me back. When you're in a healthy space and loving yourself, feeling yourself, you loving yourself, then if I love you and you're not in a place to reciprocate, it's no harm, no foul. Because I happily walk away in love with myself. I happily walk away a source to self. So I am not subject to your name calling. I am not subject to your disapproval. I am not subjected to your dysfunction because I am enough. I'm not loving you for you to love me. I'm loving you because I love you. And if you reciprocate that back, then man, we can have a dynamic and beautiful relationship because you're loving me from your overflow and I'm loving you from my overflow. And there's enough there for everybody. There's enough there for me. There's enough there for you. There's enough to include others. So we have to take time to look inside when these impulses and compulsions start to show themselves. We have to take the time to pause and ask ourselves, now wait, where's this feeling coming from? Why is there this need to tolerate this behavior from this person? Why is there the need to go above and beyond to please these people? Why is there a need for me to bend over backwards to feel complete or whole? We have to, when we start to feel those are impulses. When we start to feel those things, we have to pause. And we have to say, wait, well, where does that come from? Stay in your body. When we look outside of ourselves for external validation, whether that's drugs, alcohol, sex, promiscuity, failed relationship after failed relationship after failed relationship, when we look at, when we start to accept those things as actions of ourselves, then we're playing right along with the narrative of the movie that's being played in our own heads. And that movie has to be cut off. In order to know that I am enough, I have to become enough to myself. In order for me to know that I am enough, I have to let this inner child in me know that I hear you, I see you, and you matter. That is how you heal that inner child, by letting it know that I see you. I see in my behavior what you're asking for. Letting this inner child know that I hear you. I hear your cries before I make such foolish acts. I hear your cries. And let this inner child know that they matter. I will now make adjustments for the sake of protecting this inner child. They have to know that, your inner child has to know that it is seen, that it is heard, and that it matters. If you cannot do this, it's not a problem. That is what we do at Ohio Christian Counseling Ministries. We help people see, recognize, and understand the needs of that inner child, the hurt of that inner child, and how to heal that inner child. Because once that inner child is healed, it is no longer seeking external validation. It is now giving you confirmation of your actions on loving it. It now produces in you an overflow. And in that overflow, it allows you to incorporate and put into place something that a lot of people, even though they say they love themselves and they say that, they have some level of esteem, people operate without boundaries, rules, and limitations. If there are no boundaries, rules, and limitations, it is a fact that you do not and you cannot love yourself without boundaries, rules, and limitations. Because whatever is loved is protected. Whatever is loved, there's rules to the interaction. Whatever is loved, there's a limit to what you can say, do, and expect from me. If you do not have boundaries, rules, and limitations in place, chances are you are operating from a broken and unhealed place. You do not have to live this way. That inner child is only wanting you to turn around, stop giving, pay attention to its impulses, because in those impulses it is crying out to you. It is simply wanting you to turn around and just notice that it's there. And once you notice that it's there, it will continuously reveal to you the areas in itself where it needs the most love. And if we can just focus on that, if we could give that part of us that love that it needs, we'll all be okay. We'll all put ourselves in a position where we can have connections, honest, healthy connections and relationships. And we don't have to continuously keep going through this a cycle of emotionally self-sacrificing for the sake of wanting others to love us, loving people to be loved. If you feel that you can benefit from this type of counseling and therapy, reach out to us at Ohio Christian Counseling Ministries. Once again, I am your host, Michael L. Pearson, and I look forward to catching you again next week.